I feel like I missed the point where it was cool. It was like nerdy back then, and then like it just like happened, and now all these people hate AI and everything. And I was like, wait.
I'm really nervous about sort of like an idiocracy situation with
yeah.
AI.
If the grid goes down, I'm dead in 3 weeks.
Hi, my name's Dominic Sellitto, and I'm a clinical assistant professor in the UB School of Management, and I teach predominantly cybersecurity and artificial intelligence.
Hi, I'm Shawn Chiki. I'm faculty in the architecture department here at UB, and I teach emerging technologies and design in the context of the built environment.
I'm curious a bit on your background. You've been working in generative AI and researching for quite a while, so tell me about it.
I'm in the architecture department, and I feel comfortable in the context of architecture, but I'm more of an artist of using machine intelligence in order to make surprises. I mean, like, this is an example of that like it started off as just like these 9 pixels in the middle, and then it just kept outpainting.
Oh, that's cool.
And it would make a mistake, and then it would like make mistakes on that mistakes, and then it would create something new. And I was even like in high school making generative, digital art. That was what I was working with originally, and then once it was like deep neural net stuff, I was like feeding this kind of these digital images into that to get what we now would consider a style transfer.
Sure.
Automation in general for longest time with computers especially is binary. It's like, this plus this equals this plus this equals this. And I remember first hearing from friends that were working with AI back in 10 years ago, and they were like, yeah, it's making decisions that we can't figure out why it made those decisions. It's like a black box. That's when that started, and that was exciting to me. So I'm interested in that. I'm interested in how do we get surprises out of these things. And then I feel like I missed the point where it was cool. It was like nerdy back then, and then like it just like happened, and now all these people hate AI and everything. And I was like, wait, I was just like, I'm not a bro. Like I was the nerd. What? You worked with cybersecurity, right? That's your history.
Yeah.
Before you were working here. I wanted to ask about how you value the term, or however you define the term, of creativity, of creative thinkers.
Yeah.
In cybersecurity, what's the benefit of creativity? How can you justify creative people's existence?
Yeah. So this is a really good question, because I think a lot of people look at folks like me with my background in cybersecurity and even just in management in general, risk management, it looks boring. And part of that is because it is boring, right? At a certain point, right? At a certain level, it's boring, it's mundane, it is step 1 through 10 in a process, and you follow that process ad nauseum. But my foray into even tech was all about, doing Super Mario 64 ROM hacks and building my own levels in these games, cool. And that's how I got.
I do game levels too.
Yeah, that's how I started to love technology and be able to figure out how to kind of do stuff like that. But security actually wasn't even in the wheelhouse. I've always been more on the. I have no artistic bone in my body, right? I cannot create art.
By the way.
I cannot create art. I've tried. I have ideas, and I've never been able to really translate them into that. And so kind of when I got into cybersecurity, one of the interesting things in my perspective, which is maybe a little bit strange, but you'll find a lot of folks in there, that creativity manifests in sort of this idea of defense. And so what happens is, in a field like cybersecurity, you're constantly being attacked. But you're constantly being attacked by very smart people who are finding very elegant ways to break systems, right? Yeah. And we joke that it's artistic. It's very creative what they do, because they go, well, what if instead of calling Dominic up on the phone and saying, give me your password, what if we did this convoluted, elaborate Ocean's 11 style thing that gets from point A to point B, and suddenly Dominic's given us his password, he doesn't even know it. And so the creativity is in trying to imagine those scenarios in that way, and then kind of just really trying to think outside the box and say, okay, well, if that were to happen hypothetically, what would I do to defend against it? Even when I was hiring on teams, we always hired folks with honestly, we had a lot of folks on our team with more kind of creative backgrounds, with more arts degrees. With we had tons of fine arts degrees and things like that as well. That kind of had that more open mind. That's where that comes in, and that's also where I got interested in AI and machine learning, is because not because it can input and output something statically, but because I can input something in, and through the mathematical structure, it can output something totally new, totally different. And that different thing could be wrong. It could be not what I asked for, but it can spark that conversation and spark that theory. And so my first foray into AI was actually in cybersecurity defense. So we were working with tools that had, just basic machine learning algorithms built into them for, classification, and we were training small little models to do like anomaly detection or classify something as bad or good. And I started to think, this is cool. Not only is it cool because it lets me go home sooner, but it's also cool because it's giving me this window into this thing that there's so much data, so much information there that I could never process. It's processing it, and then it's giving me these things that I never would have thought about. And because of that, I can do cool things. And so it frees me up to not only engage with that more creative side, but also to be better at that thing I was already doing.
There's a few things that you mentioned there that go into something that is worth talking about. You got the AI to do something that you knew how to do, but just faster, right? And then one of the things that I noticed when I was working with my students is say if they didn't know how to do something in the first place, the AI wasn't the right tool because they still wouldn't know how to do it even though the AI did it.
Correct.
So it made me realize the importance of they need to know how to do it before they know how to automate it. So then they know the value of automating it. And the students that I found successful, and I said this at the forum, were the curious ones, the ones that were just interested in seeing what else will it give, and the students that didn't have as even interesting of projects as they would have if they didn't use AI at all were the ones that just typed something in and then it just gave something and they were just that's it. Oh, you said something about game level design. I didn't know that you did that, I did that, and I think that I can see the connection that it gives us a sense of authority or agency. It gives us a sense of agency over the machine and the machine world or whatever, that we can be the game level designers rather than younger people or students or older people, whoever, that are no, I am just subject to all this digital technology, and it just does things for me, and it either works or it doesn't. Versus, I'm the dungeon master.
No, and I think that's a really good point, and that agency I think is in what you saw with your students. The ones who learned were able to exert that agency over the system while also still maintaining the idea that, I want just one more generation to see if I can get something cool or some new creative thing. Or what if I just changed this particular token in the prompt and what happens there, right? And there's a drastic difference between that and the people who think I'm just the subject of this. And it's I think I talked about this in mine where I get these emails that say, I understand the importance of attending your class, but I am not attending today because blah, 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 blah. And I go, okay, well, you just typed in, write an excuse of why I'm not coming to class today in ChatGPT, completely ignoring the fact in the syllabus that I wasn't taking attendance anyway, and sent that email off.
Do you feel I've felt like, I don't know if you agree, that like the more that I use ChatGPT, the more predictable it feels to me. That
Absolutely.
like at the beginning I was like, oh my God, it can like do anything, and then now it's like, yeah, that sounds like something it would say.
Yeah, it has a voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has a voice. And same thing with the image generation tools as well. You know, they have a style. I mean, and you can download different, you know, LoRa frameworks for the open source ones to get them to do different things in different styles. But ultimately, you know, they have that same problem that you talked about, which is sort of it's sort of like overfit on a particular voice or a particular way or style of responding. And the only way to get it to not do that is to know what it is you're trying to do very deeply, and to know, well, what buttons do I need to press in my prompt to sort of,
or even just like before that in like the training period, whatever you're organizing as the data set is a political act, because you're setting it up to do these things. You made these chatbots. You know, I had Shawnbot, whatever. You had students make chatbots. Is that how that was?
Yeah. They used open source. So they used a couple of them used different ones. So they used open source language models. One of them was Meta's Llama 2 at the time, right? Yeah. And what they were trying to do was create tools that used these AI, but that resembled traditional computer systems. And so, like a web form, I go in and I type in my email address, my contact info, and I click submit, and it's input output. Something very predictable happens at the end of that. What we found was that as people were using things like ChatGPT, they were falling victim to that voice, to saying, oh, well, write me an email that excuses me from class, or in one of the cases that we did for ease, write me a cover letter, for this job. And everybody writes that in, and then everybody gets the same generic, crummy cover letter.
And that doesn't. We see through that, by the way.
Yeah, really, really, really well through that. And so do the employers, right? And so what they were thinking was, oh, this is saving me a bunch of time, was actually harming them, right? Because it's creating this ecosystem where what they're writing is actually worse than not writing one at all. And so we're like, okay, well, how can we get them to engage with AI without them engaging with AI, and almost sort of force that creativity? And so what's happening in the background of things like that cover letter generator or some of the other tools that students were using is there's an element of randomness that we've injected in the background that is basically, well, you fill out the prompt, which is, you know, like a Mad Lib, right? You put, you know, job title, my resume, the other thing in that instance, and you click submit. But then what happens in the background is it feeds all of that to the language model and then adds like a random seed to it. That just kind of tries to interpret that differently, so at least you get some sort of output. And sometimes it's like, I'm really, really excited to apply for this job, even though it sounds boring, right? Like, and you're like, okay, well, that's not the move, right? And so
it makes them think.
Yeah, sometimes it outputs something that's not great, but in that not great one, you go, oh, well, I really like that bullet point. Or I really like this particular sentence.
Great because of this.
Or it just makes them laugh and takes you out of the stress of the job search. And so it's designed to accomplish something that is accelerating, but also not removing you from having that agency to say, actually.
It's funny, like with my students and using Midjourney, like image generators, they have a chaos value. Turned it all the way to 100%.
All the way, turned it to 100,
Because then it gives you big variations, and it makes you have to choose between them.
It's the only way. It's the only way to use these tools and not have them converge on something like the dead internet theory of content, right? Where everything just sounds the same and is all generated by a bot, right? We need that creativity and that chaos as it's described there is good. But you mentioned Shawnbot. What's Shawnbot? I got to know what Shawnbot is.
I use ChatGPT to you can make the custom GPT. I didn't go like super into it. It's still Open AI. But I was making custom GPTs for my class, and I was just training them on each week's assignment. As it'd be too much for me to go around to 30, 40 students at a time, and like they all, two people have questions at the same time on other sides of the room, and they're different questions. So I made this Shawnbot to guide them through it. A lot of it had to do with like just teaching students the design process in the first place of divergent thinking and convergent thinking, critical thinking. Like they were designing anything 3D from the size of like a watch or even smaller to the size of a space station, and it would end up being like, okay, so like that's your design. Like, why did you do that? Like, what about this? What about that? So I wanted to make a bot that could ask those questions. We did a Mad Libs type thing where it's like, okay, we're making a nightclub for babies, in Manhattan. Like, what are all the things that we got to think about? And it's like seating, like where are the parents, like what's the lighting, what's the this? And it did that all, and it's like goes deeper than like any student without practice would immediately go into it. What was funny is sometimes I would come over to the student and the chatbot gave it totally advice that I would not have given the student. But I had to go along with it anyway because I'm like, well, I mean, like if you feel like you got stuff out of this, then like that's something.
I think that there are conversations that need to happen because I think the viewpoint of this has been perturbed into like marketing speak, right? That is, AI is the future. It's going to replace everything you do. Then again, to your point, there's replace it with what? Right. And
well, I'll tell students like AI isn't taking your job. Someone using AI will take your job.
And my big thing is even our students. I was having this conversation with somebody. I was at a conference this past weekend in Utah, and they were talking about AI and how soon in undergrad should we be talking about AI versus graduate programs, and should we be training them? Should we not be training them? Et cetera, et cetera. And I got to talking with some folks. I'm like, but what about? It's not like. This is a problem for the immediate term. But 10 years from now, we're going to be getting undergraduate students into our programs that have have been using AI since they were 8, right? 7,
same with
6,
digital,
right? But not only that, but building potentially really terrible habits, right? In the meantime of assuming it is a replacement without anything to replace it with, or it is a replacement for creativity. And I'm posing a lot of, I guess, ethical dilemmas that float around my brain, but I'm looking at it and I'm like, I look at stuff like what you're doing and I'm like, this image generation, and I look at this conversation about creativity, and I look at this conversation like what you said about needing to know how to do a thing and then using AI to sort of augment that.
It's automation.
It's like, how do we bring that? How do we bring that down to my wife teaches first grade. How do I bring that to her first graders?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been tasked with thinking about it in the first grade level. I'll teach like high school students at Buffalo Center for Arts and Technology, and then there's the ARC 122, which is what this class was, and it's like first level. And I've taught like a grad seminar as well, and like they have the same problems of like letting it think for them kind of thing. And conclusion that I came to out of this seed fund, and I came into this more Silicon Valley stars in my eyes, oh, this is going to be like, everything's good about this, and then, started seeing like students like using it to get it to think for them. But to have them go back and forth between drawing something with their hands, talking about it with each other first. No digital tools at all. Like not even the computer, because like they're, you talked about habits. Like, I got bad habits I'm on my phone all the time.
Absolutely,
and there's a certain like mind numbingness that happens, and it's like I have to get every computer and phone screen out of my room, and I'm just like me and my sketchbook again, and to be like, okay, I'm actually thinking as a person again, and like, what are my ideas? To go back and forth between that and the AI is just like how I've been doing it since this.
It's like hand math versus a calculator, right? You gain that appreciation too for the process and the underlying mechanisms. It's been one of the things that I've struggled with on the computer side of things, with with a lot of things. But I'm like, okay, well, I've got a lot of people that I work with or have worked with in industry that are on my teams that I manage, that I hired, that they're using technology, but there's no concept of what is actually happening. Like what is it actually doing? Right. Oh well, I click this button and something magical happens. And go, but what is the magic? Do you know what the
right.
magic is? Because
Yeah.
if you don't, at the very most
you
basic,
trust it?
how do
Yeah,
you
yeah.
trust it? Right? You don't know if it's wrong.
Right.
But on a deeper level than that, we always used to joke about the maths professors when I was an undergraduate student in like the mid 2000s
You're not gonna have a
here.
calculator in
You're
your
not
pocket.
You're not always going to have a calculator in your pocket. Or what are you going to do if there's a solar flare and it knocks out all the technology and you don't have that? I'm like, I'm going to go fishing, right?
Yeah,
and then I'm like, wait a minute, I don't know how to fish,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. No,
it's kind of like the
if
outcome.
the grid goes down, I'm dead in 3 weeks. Like I'm so reliant.
But the reality of it is when it comes to things like automation tools, there is a kernel of truth to that philosophy, even if we joke about it, which is. If you don't know what you're doing in the absence of it, how are we building off of it to do better things? One of the things that I'm really nervous about, I'm really nervous about sort of like an idiocracy situation with AI, where it's just like, well, it makes everything so easy. Why bother?
Right.
Why bother doing that? Or why? Not that I feel like that, but that I'm worried that it's going to actually cause more of that. And that's one of my main trepidations. As much as I, embrace the field, I think there's a lot of work to be done that we as humans haven't really been good at doing to have those conversations like what we're having right now. We really need to look back at the missteps that we've made. Because I still don't, we talk about like, you talk about your work in AI and ARC 122, right? And the work that you do with high schoolers and things like that. I still don't see that type of work happening on like social media literacy. Right. And so I'm glad to see that we're doing it in AI. Right. I'm glad that we're able to kind of have that have that ability to work it in and that foresight. But that a lot of it, whether we consciously know it or not, I think is derived from the past where we didn't maybe have those conversations. We didn't know to have those conversations as early on. And so I think that's really shaping it. And so even when we talk about elementary school and middle school and high school and kids kind of getting engaged with this, who you're training right now is the parents of the kids, and we hope that kind of works its way down into the next generation of working with these things and using them properly.
I'm reading about how before the printing press, it wasn't really that important intellectual property or like authorship of like this one person had this idea before anybody else, and that's like what's important. They need credit like for this. And I feel like AI is bringing, pre-printing press ideas about authorship as like this is a communal wealth of knowledge.
It's creating this sort of need for us to reimagine. I think how we view ownership of content and authorship of content and the monetization of that is going to be one of the bigger industry shakeups. 100%. Right. Is in there was the debacle with Scarlett Johansson's voice in OpenAI.
She said no, and then
she said no, and then they used somebody who sounded suspiciously like Scarlett Johansson, for the thing. And it's like, okay, well, how do we handle that? All the way down to there's already lawsuits forming against image generation sites that are creating deepfakes of people and celebrities. Without it, it's kind of like there's so many ethical dilemmas for us to navigate, and it encounters authorship, it encounters personal likeness, it encounters all of this there's just so much work to do. So like it's kind of like where I talk to people, I'm like, if anybody's worried about us losing jobs over this, no, there's going to be tons of room, particularly for lawyers. But there's going to be there's a lot of things that we need to figure out, and we need to figure it out quickly.
Ultimately, I'm mostly concerned about like profit incentives and like in the context of authorship and like copyright, intellectual property. I'm morally like for just like open source, just like keeping everything open source, and I get skeptical once a big company gets in the mix, like a giant corporation or something, like Walmart steals. Like a phrase that like some poor kid invented or whatever. They're making millions on this T-shirt. Kid gets nothing. That's when I start to think like I don't like that anymore. And I was going to ask you about like your opinions about open sourcing. Llama, like the models, like even Sam Altman of like OpenAI is like ask questions like, should we have all of the tech that we're doing be open source?
Open source has risks, but closed sourcing everything doesn't get rid of those risks.
Right.
It just makes them somebody else's problem momentarily until they themselves open source it. So it's not, I have a lot of people that are like, oh, well, if you open source image generation models, bad things are going to happen. I'm like, yes, those bad things are already happening. People were going to be using them in that way. They were going to be built. The cat is out of the bag once the technology exists. Just because a company A, right, decides, oh, I'm going to close source this particular thing, does not cut off the open source community. It actually just makes it drives it further underground. Right. It makes it actually, in my opinion, anecdotally makes it more dangerous because it's less visible. Right. The open source community, it thrives off of. It does thrive off of the honor system, right? People using things ethically and building things and taking things. But I think the net benefit in society to having that technology open, like because it's open source, I can do what we're doing with ease right now over the course of the next year, which is trying to create a new package of this like micro app ecosystem that can be bite-sized, that I can deploy to and give to public school IT administrators and teachers so that they can run it off their laptops. I couldn't do that if it was closed source. I can only do it because it's open source. And so does the negative of somebody who was already going to do something bad with the technology, should that have stopped that open source from being able to be driven to folks who otherwise would never have had the opportunity to get involved with technology? In my opinion, the answer is absolutely not,
Yeah, I'll find myself agreeing with that, like we should be open sourcing things, like everything should be open source. But then if I say, for example, if I apply that same logic to anything else, like nuclear weapons, like it's like I now I'm on the other side. Like I don't want everyone to have access to nuclear weapons.
I think it has to have. And again, this dives into a whole philosophical conversation: who decides good versus bad? Right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the answers.
I don't have the answers. I wish I did, but it's good to talk about it. Right? It's even good to just think about it. And so I'm sure somebody watching this will have some answers or be shouting at them.
No, you have the answers.
Answer the question. This has been really cool.
I can't wait to see. It's delightful for me as well. Like I didn't even get a full view of like your range of your experience and the spectrum, and this is even better than I expected.
For me too, and I'm looking forward to seeing the cool stuff that you're doing in ARC 122 and beyond, because I think it's really, really important work. In fact, I'd love to see I'd love to see a scenario where students, we talk about students engaging with AI, where students have to take courses that force them to do both the manual and the creative, and be creative and use that technology creatively, because otherwise that part of your brain locks a little bit. It's hard to unlock it. So I appreciate your perspective.
I mean, like you said, you're not creative. I have students that will say that, and I'm like, you're wrong. You already do. You said you made video games. Like what are you talking about? That's creative.
We get trained. We get locked in a box, right? And it kind of locks off that ability to feel like that. And so I kind of appreciate your perspectives a lot on that, because I think it's really important. So thank you.
Yeah. Everyone's creative. It's fine.
Thanks for watching this episode of UB Tech Talk. Check out other episodes at buffalo.edu/ubit/techtalk.